Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
Hello and welcome. And as the introductory, welcome says, this show is brought to you by Spirit Seeker Magazine and the wonderful advertisers, writers, the readers, etc., who have been reading this magazine for the last 15 years. We started in St. Louis, we expanded into Kansas City, and throughout other parts of Missouri and Illinois. We added Chicago a little over a year ago, and starting with our October issue, we will also be available in Arkansas as a print magazine. The same print magazine goes to all these cities, and in addition, we are read online and have been online since, I think it was 1997 when we started publishing online, which was kind of ahead of a lot of the other magazines. But because of that, we have had readers online for many, many years, and the online version is normally larger than our print edition. We make sure we cover all of the events in the Midwest, since that the print version goes to the Midwest, but then we want to give our readers even more, and so we have a lot of book reviews and other information that is always online. All you have to do is go to spiritseeker.com. You can click on the radio show icon in the upper left-hand corner, and the over 200 radio shows from the last few years are all archived there. You can listen to them from your iPod. You can listen to them from your computer. There's just so many different ways to access the amazing, wonderful interviews that are available to you via Blog Talk and, of course, Spirit Seeker that makes that possible. Okay, so I do want to just mention a few of the articles in this issue, and then I will bring my guest on to the call. This is National Yoga Month, so we have 3 different articles in this issue of Spirit Seeker talking about yoga is more than exercise. There's a whole spiritual component to it, and yet, as one of the articles shares, a woman had a hip surgery, and she was she loved to ride horseback. And when she had the hip replacement, of course, that was curtailed a little bit at first, and she went to yoga for pain relief, and then the next thing you know, through the movements of yoga, she not only could ride her horse, but she could ride her horse in a whole new way, pain-free, and then she got the other benefits of yoga. So all of these are in this issue. There's also an article about the mood-food connection, Enjoying Your Food by Denise Lynn and her daughter, who have co-authored that. There's an article by my guest, Dr. Elaine Aron, who is the author of The Highly Sensitive Person. And the article addresses how to thrive when the world overwhelms you. And Dr. Aron has earned her MA from York University in Toronto in clinical psychology and her PhD at Pacifica Graduate Institute in clinical depth psychology, as well as interning at the C.G. Jung Institute in San Francisco. Besides beginning the study of the innate temperament trait of high sensitivity in 1991, she, along with her husband, Dr. Arthur Aron, have become 2 of the leading scientists studying the psychology of love and close relationships. They are also pioneers in studying both sensitivity and love using functional magnetic resonance imaging. She maintains a small psychotherapy practice in Mill Valley in San Francisco, and as I said earlier, she is the author of The Highly Sensitive Person, and there is also a workbook. So, Dr. Aron, are you there?
Oh, I am right here. You can call me Elaine.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, Elaine, you've been on obviously in the world of understanding the mind and understanding the heart and understanding the sensitivities that so many have never really known how to explain. And we've always heard that person's high strung, or that person, you have to tiptoe around them. But this is bigger, what we're talking about here. So, would you be kind enough to explain to our listeners just how you got on this track and where you have seen things evolve and change as people become more aware?
Well, I got on this track because quite a while ago, back there in about 1990, a counselor said to me, she was trying to help me with my kind of overreaction to a medical procedure. And she said, I think you're just highly sensitive. And I said, what is that? And she said, well, I don't know, but all the people I really like are highly sensitive, including myself. I had no idea what she was talking about. And actually, she couldn't even remember saying it, and she didn't know exactly what she meant herself. But I began to research it, and I found that there really wasn't any, we used the word, but nobody had ever really tried to define it, certainly not in clinical psychology. So I decided to interview people who thought that they might be highly sensitive. I just used that term, okay? Do you think you're highly sensitive? I'd like to learn more about what you're like. And I talked to 40 people about that for several hours each, and then I devised a questionnaire of about 60 items, and we boiled that down to about 27 items, and those questions seem to distinguish sensitive from non-sensitive people. We've used that questionnaire now in genetic studies and brain studies, and it sorts out people pretty nicely.
Well, and this is available, listeners, on Elaine's website, which is hsperson.com. There is a wonderful self-test, and then there's another to see if your child is highly sensitive. There's another checklist, and I started off in nursing back in the 70s.
Oh yeah,
and I was fine in the classroom. Understanding and, the theory and all that. And then when we went into clinicals, it was within the first 2 weeks. My nursing instructor, on the clinical side, pulled me into her office and she said, I really think you might want to reconsider your career. And I said, what do you mean? I was just like totally, astonished.
Yes.
And she said, you're too emotionally involved with your patients. And she said, I think you might want to consider being a radiology technician. And I looked at her and I said, what do I need to do? She said, what do you mean? And I said, I want to be a nurse. I want to help people. And she said, well, then you're going to have to really change the way you do this. But, how did I know?
Sure. How did you
do things? Right.
Yes, and I could have support groups all over the country of nurses who are highly sensitive, teachers who are highly sensitive, lawyers who are highly sensitive, doctors. Many of them have left their fields because it became too difficult for them, because all those fields have changed. They were the natural fields for sensitive people at one time, but it's not the technology that drives sensitive people out. It's the harshness that sort of come into those fields, and the money oriented, and the time pressure, and it's more highly stimulating. Sensitive people are about 15 to 20% of the population, and this is an innate trait. It's not something, obviously you could become more sensitive if you were isolated for 5 years and then brought back into the world. You'd be bothered by sound at first and visual stimuli, but this is really an innate trait, and you see it in children. We all notice that children have different temperaments, but this is a minority of children, and of course it's a minority of adults, and it's actually found in animals. Over 100 species so far have been found to have this, about the same percentage of individuals that are more sensitive, and there's evolutionary reasons for why that would be the case and why it would be a minority. So we're real, and of course the whole theme of the spirit, I don't talk a lot about that with sensitive people because everybody has their own path. But one of the first things I discovered in interviewing sensitive people was I had a list of questions, and at the end I would ask people about their spiritual lives. It always came up before the end of the interview. People always brought it up. This is a very important area for sensitive people. And empathy, we found mirror neurons in sensitive people are more active than in non-sensitive people. So your empathy for your patients, that's just the way that you approach life and the way you approach people.
Right. Well, and I've been in energy medicine, for many, many years, and I'm trained in Feng Shui. And one of the things that we find in Feng Shui is oftentimes people cannot figure out why they're not happy in a house. And energetically, it's just like when we can see it more with businesses. We think about that more. If there's a restaurant that fails, and then another restaurant comes in and that fails, and then another restaurant comes in, and you think, well, I wonder how long that one's going to last. But what people do not realize is that the homes have the energy grid from the prior inhabitants, from whatever happened in that house, and the sensitives, they know it. They just feel something. So a lot of times what I'm doing with Feng Shui, as much as analyzing the space and helping people set intention, is clearing out the old energy and helping them, recreate through intention and keeping the space clear what they want, and I'll never forget when I learned biobiology, which is it's designed in Germany. They understand that even the sensitivity of what we're using for our floor coverings and what we're using for our lighting, and that was one of the things. Are you sensitive to lights? Are you sensitive to smells, to chemicals? And so in this technique, well, it's not even a technique, it's a course of study, biobiology, they use the electromagnetic frequencies. They study, the walls, they do not encourage wallpaper on walls at all, because especially vinyl wallpaper, because then the walls cannot breathe. And they actually check the EMFTs within a home, because they have found that if the electromagnetic field is too high, people have trouble sleeping. They have trouble resting. Their bodies are constantly, with this energy grid going through them. And computers do this, and so some of your questions, when you ask, is your child highly sensitive, some of them are, do other people's moods affect them? Do they get overwhelmed easily by bright lights, strong smells, coarse fabrics, or sirens close by? And, you can see these startled responses in some babies. Some babies sleep through anything. Other babies are aware of everything. So these are wonderful. Okay, so once you realize that you perhaps have a highly sensitive child, what do you recommend? I mean, I know you have lots of things, your book and your workbook, and you're actually teaching a workshop where we'll talk in a little bit. But, I had just before we even go to this next part, I had several readers who are friends call me and say, oh, my goodness, I just read that article in Spirit Seeker, and I know I'm a highly sensitive person. So they're like, do you think I should go take the workshop? I'm like, well, of course. It's like, 4.5 hours from St. Louis? I said, and how often is this workshop going to happen, Go while she's here in the Midwest. So, but just for neophytes that know, that just are being drawn to this and your wisdom, where does a parent start? And where does the person start when they kind of realize, well, you know what, I think I am one of these?
Well, I think one side of it is that sensitive people fundamentally process everything more deeply. So, I mean, we're sensitive to stimuli, but even more so, we're sensitive. Our preference is to observe before acting, to think about things, to reflect on things, and our it comes. Even the immune system does that, and the whole nervous system does that. Fruit flies, there's those that are called sitters and those that are called rovers. So some of it's not conscious; it's the whole body is this way. But sensitive children are observing everything, and they're often seen as shy or reticent or something, because they're watching, and to appreciate that and to be sure that everybody else around them understands that there's nothing wrong with them, that their preference is perhaps to be quiet, and then to realize that they don't need this, they just don't need the same kind of level of punishment or lecturing or instruction that other children need. They get things very quickly. I don't know that I would equate it the same as high intelligence, although I've spoken at conferences for gifted education, and they swear that the 3% of people who are gifted are all highly sensitive. I can't say probably not all highly sensitive or gifted by their definition, because it's a larger number of them. But we're really dealing with a different kind of person and a different kind of child, and I think that's the most fundamental thing to get. And once you get that, everything else kind of follows. They are usually very compassionate. I mean, I've had parents tell me, as soon as my child found out where meat came from, she couldn't eat meat, and they were going to go to a meat packing plant, and she couldn't go, or some child's being bullied at school, and my boy just can't stand it, and they learn to adapt. They learn to keep their mouths shut, basically, but they're still watching, and they are more affected by trauma, unfortunately. So then, as adults, very often sensitive people have been damaged in some way, if we've had a good enough childhood, we're less prone to anxiety and depression than other people and physically healthier than other people. But if there has been trauma, we're more prone to depression and anxiety and all of those things. So that's why it's so important to raise these children well. And, of course, if we're an adult who's been through those things, to get the help that we need with the appreciation that you might need more help, or you might, somebody else might say, well, my childhood was just like yours and it was fine. It didn't bother me, but it would have bothered the sensitive person more. So it's an important part of it is being sure to do the healing you need.
Well, and now more than ever, children are stimulated, between their iPhones,
yes.
between, and it's interesting. I raised 4 stepchildren and 3 children, and so my children, biologically range from 26 down to 14. And I'll tell you what, I've gone to open house for 7 of these kids, right? Okay, so I go to open house this year, and I'm one of the older parents. I'm, late 50s, and but there were very few parents that came to the open house this year, and I was really shocked. Probably it was the least attended open house I've ever gone to, and yet the teachers are younger and snappier, and the one biology teacher does not believe in anything paper, so everything's electronic. Well, there's a new advancement from Google, and you'll understand where I'm going in a moment. It's no longer Google Docs. There's another generation of Google something for teachers and students. So the teacher is sitting at home in the evening, can see every single student when they're entering to do their homework, if they're on the right track or if they're going in a wrong direction. It's biology. And then he will actually email the student and say, you're on the wrong track, you might want to rethink going in this direction. I just sat there overwhelmed by the whole thing. And then I said to him, I said, that feels a little invasive to me. And he said, why? He said, why would you let a student struggle when all you have to do is just point them in the right direction, and then they get it, and then they're prepared for class? And I said, okay, I get it. I get it. But I walked out of there thinking, this is a whole new deal. This is all new. And they're doing a pilot program where, they've never let the cell phones in the school. Now they're trying it in middle school, and they're trying it in one high school, because they know that the way these kids get their information is from their phones. And so they're spending all this energy trying to keep them off the phones, and now they're like, you know what, let's just surrender. What does the teacher do? The teacher's checking their texts and messages and Facebook. So it's extraordinarily like they're coming from every angle with information. So I think we have to understand how important it is for what you're describing with how do we take an extremely sensitive child already, and then they're bombarded from every direction with communications. What do we do with this? And your questions, about, when people are uncomfortable in a physical environment, I tend to know what needs to be done to make it more comfortable, like changing the lighting or the seating. These kids are sensitive. I think they just know intuitively some things, and they're not like, it's just changed so rapidly is what I'm getting to.
Yeah, and I think that sensitive people can change with it. I have a kind of a joke that I when bookstores were bookstores, and it's true on the internet for me too, I have an uncanny ability to find what I need rather quickly, rather than having to plow through everything. And I think that sensitive people will have a sensitivity to the internet, that they don't have to spend as much time on it. They probably won't spend as much time on it to get what they need out of it. They will adapt, and it perhaps isn't ideal for them. One of the things that's absolutely true for sensitive people is the importance of nature, of being out of doors for them. And that is something that that parents really need to emphasize with sensitive children. And I hope they figure that out. One of the things that's true is that people tend to understand their sensitivity more as they get older. They don't become more sensitive. Children are quite sensitive. Adolescents are the least sensitive. They go through a period where their sensitivity is not so obvious. By the time they get into their late 20s and 30s, they really realize that they're different from other people. it's difficult because, like you, they often have to try several careers before they find the right one. I think what parents need to do is to encourage them to take breaks, just to encourage them to take breaks away from everything. They don't have to be online as much as others. And sensitive children usually get it that they're different from other kids fairly early. And the important thing is that their difference be given a good label in their minds, and then they'd be encouraged to live their life differently than other kids.
Well, and one of the things that I think is one of the dangers right now of what's going on in the school systems is they're lumping a lot of kids into ADD. They're just saying, "Oh, ADD."
Yes.
And would you like to address that? Because I think they're the sensitives. I mean, not totally. I know in some cases there are. Well, you know more about this than I do, but would you please address this? Because I think we're stereotyping a lot of things that are going on.
Yeah. First of all, the parents of kids with ADHD were very effective in getting ADHD as something that, obviously it affects learning. It's a difficulty in the executive function of the brain. So they were able to get, if your kid has ADHD, you get special attention in the schools. Therefore, it became an advantage to label any child having difficulty in school as having ADHD because they would get extra help. So the difference is that sensitive children, when put in a distraction-free environment, function better. Whereas if a child with ADHD actually functions worse in a completely quiet environment, they need a certain amount of stimulation around them, and that's why they need stimulants in order to keep their brain revved up and doing its job. So in a way, it's the opposite. Now, I've had people tell me that they are highly sensitive and also have ADHD, very rarely, but I've had people say that to me. And I don't know quite what to make of it except to say that every brain is really quite different. We don't understand that much about the brain or genetics. There's certainly multiple genes that govern sensitivity, and perhaps there are certain combinations that can make that possible. But for the most part, I'd say that they tend to be the opposites. But here's the deal, is that if you have a child in a classroom that's highly stimulating, they're liable to be hyperactive because they're just being overwhelmed. I think the boys tend to go in that direction. The girls there's another kind of ADD without the hyperactive part, and girls get labeled with that. And a lot of them, I agree, are highly sensitive and don't have that. And it's a very stimulating world, as you say, that people live in. And one person said, well, ADHD can be a little bit like you're driving really fast down a freeway and then you hit a traffic jam and you stop, and your whole nervous system is kind of like buzzing and upset because you want to go and go and go, and it's hard to switch down to, now I'm just going to be at a standstill. And that's kind of the way the brain is with all the stimulation. It is hard to cool down after all of that. It's hard for kids especially. Sometimes sensitive children will come home and have total tantrums because they're overstimulated, and that can happen in the school too, although usually sensitive kids come home to do that.
Well, and it's interesting. 2 of my 3 children would go to, like if you said, okay, we'll talk about that tomorrow, or you know what, we'll do that tomorrow, even when they were just really small, if you said something about tomorrow, or we'll do that when you wake up from your nap, I am not exaggerating this. The 2 that I thought, how can this be? They would wake up, I don't care if it was 6 hours later, 7 hours later, a short nap, 2 hours later, they would wake up and immediately go to whatever it was that was discussed right before they went to sleep. And I thought, how can this be? And then my one son would never take naps. I mean, from the time he was little, but I would have him take quiet time. He was allowed to work with, blocks, Lincoln Logs, read books. It really didn't matter, but he had to have some quiet time. And I think that that's missing, with a lot of kids today. They go, and one of the things that, on your questionnaire that I thought, these game systems that they're playing. You know, and one of the things that you said, one of the questions on the sensitive list was something to do with video games and violence and, you know, et cetera. So, I mean, and I think that, you know, I think that's a problem right now for a lot of kids.
Well, it is, but again, I think that sensitive children can make their decisions if they just have a little bit of encouragement to be different. Their nervous systems will guide them away from that stuff. And those that don't get it when they're young will get it a little bit later.
So, listeners, we are going to take questions for Dr. Elaine Aron tonight. And before we do that, though, I want to announce the information on the workshop that she will be teaching on Saturday, September 29th in Wheaton, Illinois at the Loretto Center. And this is a retreat for highly sensitive people, and it's from 9 to 5 all day long. And Candy Crawford, who is a licensed clinical social worker and has worked with Dr. Aron for some time, is sponsoring Dr. Aron to the Midwest, and you can reach her at 630-991-6200, or you can go to CandyCrawfordLCSW.com/retreat. And this is all also in the September issue of Spirit Seeker on page 4. So if you do have a question, all you have to do is press 1, and my producer will let me know that you have a question, and we will bring you on to the air. Now, where I'd like to segue next is I had a lot of adults who read the article who said, I think that's me. So we've talked a little bit about children. I would like to talk about adults who you know, and what I kept coming to with a lot of this was, you know, I have so many friends who are migraine people, and I was married to a migraine person, and I thought, you know, I wonder if a lot of the migraine people are just highly sensitive. I mean, did you run across this in your research?
Yes, I haven't studied that explicitly, but we know that migraines are triggered by different things in different people. The brain is being sensitive to something, and it seems as though most of the people that I have met, and I haven't studied this empirically, who have migraines are also highly sensitive. Not all, but most of them. And so it's one kind of variation. Lots and lots of sensitive people do not have migraines, so it's an overlap there, but not a complete and perfect one.
Well, and one of the things, you know, that you come back to with a lot of the reading that I've done preparing for the interview is that the highly sensitive people, as you've mentioned, are people say, well, they're just shy, or they're timid, or they're inhibited, or they're introverted. But you said 30% of highly sensitives are actually extroverts.
That's right, and of course I'm an introvert, but I talk a lot to the extroverted HSPs who really want to have that be clear, because we don't want to miss that 30%. A lot of it has to do with kind of how you were raised, your sense of security. Some of it has to do with another trait, which is high sensation seeking, which amazingly enough you can be highly sensitive and also a high sensation seeker, which means that you're easily bored, but also you're very careful and need lots of downtime. So people who have those two traits together, we sort of joke that it's like having one foot on the gas and one foot on the brakes. So you're eager to meet new people, but you also need downtime and you want deep conversations with those new people. And you often tend to speak your private thoughts a bit more, which sometimes is a revelation to people and sometimes just causes you problems. So it's a kind of a different, in some ways you might think it's almost ideal to have that, to be an extroverted, sensitive person. Certainly often makes such people's leaders in social situations.
Well, and it's interesting, the Myers-Briggs. You know, when you look at Myers-Briggs, you know, extrovert, introvert, intuitive feeling, perceptive, sensing. I forget. But the whole thing is this: when I'm an ENFJ, which only 10% of the population are ENFJ. So I'm an extrovert, intuitive feeling,
Right.
and
Right.
and I'm able to make decisions. But what's interesting is exactly what you just described. People think of me as an extrovert, but if
Right.
and I am able to interface with a lot of things. But if I did not have my downtime
Right.
and my quiet, I would never be able to do that.
Yeah.
So
Right.
there's this whole introverted side that most people do
Right.
not see, the part that gardens and puts my
Exactly.
hand in the dirt and doesn't wear gloves, the part that,
That's right.
because I need to get grounded, and the part that reads, and the part that
Mhm.
cooks, and the part that,
Mhm.
I just can't be around people all the time. And it's,
Mhm.
and
Well,
I know when I've
sensitive
hit
extroverts are the perfect interviewers. In fact, when I'm interviewed by anybody who's halfway decent as an interview, I always say, I know you're highly sensitive, and you're probably also a high sensation seeker and extroverted, because it's a perfect combination. You need that empathy and that intuition. As far as the Myers-Briggs go, I don't think I've ever met a sensitive person was not either an I or an N, and often both I N. But if they're sensate types, then they're always introverted. The N is pretty much of a clue. Thinking and feeling is about balanced, and I should say that there are just as many men as women born with this trait. But they have a much harder time. They hide themselves a lot more. They score lower on the self-test, but we know you're out there. They live a very different struggle, a real struggle.
Right. Well, and it's funny, the Myers-Briggs, when I first encountered it, I was working on my MBA, and this was before I totally took a career path in a different direction. And but my instructor was sales management, and he said, as a sales manager, you would never have. Actually, this was my second time I encountered it. But he was saying that as a sales manager, you would never have a sales team without knowing their Myers-Briggs, because you need to know, who's able to make decisions, who's more of an extrovert, who's more of an introvert, who would be better on the phone rather than going out in person, who would be better being given leads rather than having to do cold calling, and on. But the first time I encountered the Myers-Briggs, it was very interesting. This was a long time ago. I was a member of the Junior League, and the Junior League would take all of their initiates, their little, I forget there's a name for us, but they would analyze if you were an extrovert or an introvert, and they would never, provisionals, they would never put all the introverts together, because, who's going to get it done? So they would, with their team building community, this was like very thought out. So their community building skills had to do with, we have to have a variety of people so that the skills all blend, and we can get the maximum efficiency from our volunteers. And that was my first time, and then the second time, of course, working on my MBA, and I was like, this is fascinating. So on some level, there's like people dance around it, but I think with your work, this is really, other than, are you an empath, there's a lot of people out there with that, but they still don't address all the things you're addressing. You really are very comprehensive in this work that you're doing. So, So I know you have the book, and then what does the workbook? Because I know that we mentioned that in Spirit Seeker. So tell me what the workbook does, if you would.
Well, it's pretty novel. It takes each chapter in my book and then has people go deeply into those issues. It's a kind of a difficult workbook, pretty intense for people. The last third of it is actually how to run a group for highly sensitive people, because many people have wanted support groups, and I have a lot of experience with running groups, and so I kind of wanted to lay out how they might do that. I should also say that I've written a book called The Highly Sensitive Person in Love, about close relationships and sensitive people, and the highly sensitive child. And then I'm writing a book right now for highly sensitive parents, which I've had a number of clients in my practice and other people who are parents say to me, as highly sensitive people, you really need to address this, because parenting is very, very different if you're highly sensitive. And I am certainly seeing that. So that's my project at the moment.
Well,
So,
and when I read your excerpt, and the website, listeners, is hsperson.com. When I was reading about the highly sensitive person in love, I thought, oh my goodness, my first marriage, that's all I ever heard was, you're too sensitive. You're too
yes.
sensitive. You're too sensitive. And then I laughed when I read that you're married to a non-HSP, and there's been a few little choppy storms.
Oh, plenty of them. And in fact, finding out about our difference in temperament was an enormous, enormous help for our relationship. And very sweet, too, because when I wrote Chapter 7 in that book on relationships, as I always do, I show my work to my husband, and he reads it over and gives me his opinion. And he said, you don't get this, because what I had written was how much the highly sensitive person benefits from being with a non-sensitive person who can do this for you and that for you, deal with all these overstimulating things. He said, you don't realize how much I get from you. And this was really something I hadn't gotten. Of course, since then, I see it very obviously everywhere.
Well,
but
talk about that just a little, if you would. And if you would, and I want you to also talk about the divorce gene.
Yes, I will talk about the divorce gene. 42% of your odds of getting divorced are genetically determined. We call it heritability. Now, before you go looking for the divorce gene, realize that wearing skirts is also highly heritable, and wearing earrings and driving race cars, but obviously there's no race car gene. It's just that there are certain things that go with genetic propensities. And I think that is so high because people don't realize the role of temperament. So very often you have people who are mismatched, and their personalities are what are causing the problem. And I liken it to, I always forget the term, fetal something, you would know as a person trained in nursing, that genetic problem that babies, if they're not tested for it, it can cause
PKU.
Yeah, PKU.
Yes.
It can cause retardation, but if you know about it, you immediately handle it. It's the same thing with temperament. If you know about temperament differences between you and your partner, you can almost always handle it. It's like the Myers-Briggs in the sense that it's a kind of a no-blame thing. Okay, I'm this way, you're that way, so now let's work with it. The problem with sensitivity is that, there's lots of issues between sensitive and non-sensitive people, but because it's a minority, there's a tendency for the sensitive person to be seen as the sort of the identified patient or the problem in the family. Why can't you do this, and why can't you do that? You're too sensitive. And it's a package deal. A lot of the things that a partner likes most about you are also the flip side, or the things that are problematic for you, and the same for the non-sensitive person. So once you get it, that these are temperaments that can't be changed, then you get creative and start to figure out how to live with it. But there's a grieving process because, especially when I always tell people, the closer the person is to you, the less likely they're going to be thrilled to find out you're highly sensitive, because it suggests that, well, we're not so similar as we thought. Sometimes there's all of a sudden a shift in power where, I'm just not going to go to those football games anymore because I don't enjoy them.
Right.
And
where there's a whole new level of truth.
A whole new level of truth. And sometimes it's hard to hear, but on the other hand, we can't use it as a bludgeon and say, well, I can't do this and I can't do that. It's very often we can survive things that are maybe a little overstimulating for us. But once you begin to realize all the pluses in your partners, my husband's, he'll ask me, like, okay, I'm going to be meeting with so-and-so today. Is there anything that I should avoid saying? Is there anything you think I should do? And I will give him suggestions, often without ever having been in the situation, except just having heard a few words about. He'll come home and he says, that was just the perfect thing to do. I did such and such like you said, and it worked perfectly. He'll be walking. He loves wildflowers, and then he'll say, I've never seen that wildflower before. That's beautiful. And I'll say, it's wonderful, the freshness of appreciation, because you saw that flower 50 feet back.
Wow.
He doesn't notice things as much, but then he appreciates so much that I do, and I point things out to him.
Right.
And he can tolerate a lot more stimulation than I can, and that has great advantages for us. And there's just...
Yeah. And you know that saying, be in the world but not of it. I mean, and I think that as an HSP, you find ways, meditation, anything to find that stillness. I mean, I can meditate in the middle of a highway, at this point, but it's taken a lot of practice over the years. But I remember, when my children were younger and we had just moved. If you took a stress test, going through divorce, moving, all this, I would have been off the charts. And this one particular day, I had not meditated, and I remember my daughter, who was like 6 at the time, said, I think you need to go meditate. I mean, they knew the difference of their mother meditating or not, because it was just...
well, I started meditating when my son was about a year old, and every night we would have these meltdowns. The dinner hour?
Right. Oh, I know.
When everything goes crazy. And then when I learned to meditate, I'd come out of my meditation and everything was just peaceful. It was just so different. My child reacted to it that way. It's the first thing I advise people is to do some form of meditation for sensitive people, because it's the quickest way to get back to quiet, to grounding. And of course I say, even if you're sitting in a crowded airplane and the tarmac and it's 90 degrees, if you can go, I say there's a range from 0 to 10. If you can go from 10 to 8, that's as significant as at home if you go from 2 to 0, because this is a huge improvement in what's going on. It just feels totally different. But you can meditate anywhere with anything going on. I went in a subway, was stopped in New York City in the dark, and like everybody was getting sort of panicky. I was standing in this crowded subway. I closed my eyes and started to meditate, and I could feel everybody around me settling down.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they've done studies, years ago on the White House lawn when the transcendental meditators came and they all meditated. I forget how long it was. They did it had a ripple effect. Crime dropped. They measured it up to 200 miles out, but they, within 50 miles, it significantly plunged.
I did some of that research.
Yes, it was fascinating.
We did it in Atlanta, and we would move meditators from a high crime area to a low crime area. We'd have for 2 weeks in one area, then 2 weeks in the other area, and we'd follow the crime rates in the different precincts. And it was just like turning the gas on and off. It was amazing.
Right. Absolutely. There is, and this is why, a lot of, my clients and students will say, well, I can't meditate. My mind won't stop. I'm like, you can't afford to not meditate. There will come a time when you will realize that stillness will just, those thoughts will go. But, and some meditations even now are noisier, but still it doesn't matter. What you just described, if you're at a 2, it takes you to 0. If you're out in an airport, or I remember one time I was Christmas shopping after having attended my son's college graduation. It was extremely stressful with, I don't know, for some reason it just was. There were, it was a divorce situation, and I don't know, everything was complicated. I think it was because it was our first child graduating, and my former husband and I are not exactly chummy. And so, I mean, we do the best we can. And it has been a long time. But he is a migraine person, and he's the one who always told me I'm too sensitive, right? So after I made it through all that, and I said, okay, on the way home, we're stopping at this outlet mall and going shopping. Well, I'd had it, right? Okay, so we're at the Gap. And I told both of my children, I said, I mean, this is just, I remember this moment. I said, this is your budget. There's a chair back by the dressing rooms. Do not bother me until you're ready to go to the checkout counter unless you need my opinion on something. You'll see me there with my eyes closed, but I'm meditating. And they both just looked at me like I was this crazy person. But here I was in the middle of the shopping, and it didn't matter. I needed that for me because I had been we'd been to this ceremony and that ceremony and this dinner and that, and it was the only thing I knew, to just stop it all and come back and be back to being mom and me, I mean, I was just off the charts. And I don't know, but at any rate, you're just, and then we can't leave the sex and spirit out. You have a chapter in your book addressing, okay, so HSPs and sexuality and spirituality. Would you address this, please?
Yeah, quickly. Right.
Okay.
in all areas of life. So of course sexuality would be different too. And nobody had ever looked at temperament and sexuality, so I decided to do a survey where I had people mail in a questionnaire and also give the same questionnaire to someone else they knew who mailed that in anonymously. And so I was able to get a kind of a control group, a comparison group between sensitive and non-sensitive people, because they were asked to give it to a non-sensitive friend or someone they thought was not highly sensitive. It was nice to see that there were no more sexual hang-ups in the two groups, no more problems. Sensitive people tend to have had fewer traumatic sexual experiences. Duh, because we're more careful, we think, before we do things.
Right.
But don't need as much stimulation. Don't need as much novelty. Can find that they get so overstimulated that they need to stop at times. Harder to transition in and out of sexuality because they also find it more of a deep and mysterious experience. And so, you don't need to do it in the airplane lavatory if it's already deep and mysterious for you.
Right.
So that kind of segues, I suppose, towards the spirituality because, you can come at the spirituality, I think, from two sides. Maybe one is the more positive side of the perceiving deeply into everything you see and perhaps seeing through that into what lies beyond it and sensing something beautiful there, something to be grateful for, just something mysterious and wonderful. But I also think that sensitive people, when they see all the bad things in the world, they have to make meaning out of it. They have to work on it and chew on it. They can't just say, everything is wonderful and ignore things. We don't do denial well. It's there. We can't ignore it. So we have to work on it. And it's often non-sensitive people. I kind of call us the priestly advisors versus the warrior kings, because it's often when the warrior king, the non-sensitive people, are in a crisis, like they're dying or something like that, they'll turn to sensitive people who can, who've already thought through these things and already have a position. Interesting thing, one question not on the questionnaire was, would you be willing to sit at the bedside of a dying person and comfort them? And sensitive people were far more likely to say yes to that, and that goes back to your nursing experience of getting emotionally involved with people. It's like, this is something that we can do, maybe not relish, but can do, that most people just kind of run from because they haven't ever faced it. But we face it, we've thought about it, and so we're more prepared.
I was a nurse for 1 week, and my first patient died. And my first clinical part of why my nursing instructor kind of flipped out, I know, is I had this 30-year-old woman who had leukemia, who was a nurse herself.
Mm-hmm.
And she knows I'm
really identified.
Oh, and she had 3 children. She had twins and another one who was 2 years old. Mm-hmm. And when I walked in, she said, "What are my counts?" And, when I was student nurse, you're not supposed to give, back at that time, it was in the early 70s, you're not supposed to give them the results. That's, God Almighty, the doctors, and you didn't dare, go in and give lab results, and and I said, I can't answer that. But I'll never forget, I was there, on a Friday, I'd had her as my patient for 3 days, and when I went in on Monday, she bled out. And I knew. See, I just intuitively knew. Back then, I didn't know. I did not know that I was psychic. I knew that from the time I was a little girl, you talk about one of the questions on the children, highly sensitive people, do they have a deep, rich interior life? Well, I talked, I read all the time. I read about all the saints. I was always drawn to, spirituality and understanding this connection. And I used to dream so vividly. I would wake up and then I would think, I don't want this dream. I would literally say, as a child, I'm changing the channel. And then I go back to sleep. And if I dream that same dream again, and it would jolt me awake, and I'd say, no, I already said I want to change the channel. And I knew if it happened 3 times, there was just nothing I could do about it. It was just going to happen. Well, I didn't know that was clairvoyance. How did I know? I didn't understand it, but I knew that I just knew things. And my mother would say, "You're like little miniature Ann Landers." She said, "People just come to you for advice."
Right.
And and how did I know? So then when I started training psychics, I call them intuitive. I'll never forget this one student that I had last year who is just this creative, artistic, amazing person. And she said, when I was 14, I worked at TJ Maxx or Marshall's or something. And she said, I worked in the dressing room. And she said, and people would say, should I have this surgery that I'm scheduled for? Or should I do this? She said, I went home to my mom. I'm like, Mom, what in the world? These people are asking me what to do about their life. She says, I am 14 years old. And her mom, luckily, understood and had the same experience through life. And, they're from some different kind of religion that is from a different cultural. It's not Christianity. I don't know. I don't even know. But her grandfather was a high priest in whatever this church this is, and they all have these psychic gifts all the way through the lineage. And her mother, thank goodness she has her mother, because her mother says it's always going to be this way. She says, and they come to you because they trust you, and you just have to know that you can turn it off if it gets to be too much. So her mother actually taught her how to shield and do the inner but for the most part she surrendered, and people just come to her for advice, which is how it was for me. And I didn't understand it, and I kept bringing this teacher to town, and I studied meditation, and I studied past life regression, and all of this, and then one day we were blindfolded and we were giving readings, and I read for my teacher, and I didn't know I was reading for my teacher. And she said, don't you get it? You're one of the most, she said, by far, you are the most gifted student I've ever trained. And she said, people used to call Spirit Seeker for readings, and I'd say, no, I don't do that work, because I was like an MBA girl, and a nurse and a scientist. And I didn't understand this gift, and I don't know. And she said, every time you say no, you're saying no to God. So then, I don't know. I started saying yes, and now I do life coaching, but I get to use my intuition, I get to use the Feng Shui and all of it. And when I talked to Candy Crawford, I have to tell you, I just thought, oh my goodness, what an amazing soul. And and she said how much you helped her and helped her understand her gifts. And I think you're just helping so many people, Elaine, in ways that it's hard to explain, and yet the work you're doing. And here you are with this fabulous husband who's doing it with you. And
I joke that I was walking down the street and this parade formed behind me. As an introvert, I never planned to have. I mean, I would like to help people, but I never planned to have. I mean, it's sort of shocking when I think about the effect that it's had. I don't do very much public speaking. I'll speak at Kripalu and sometimes in Esalen now and then, but actually this is the first time it might be the first time I've ever done anything in the Midwest. I only speak once or twice a year, so I wanted to do this for Candy because I wanted to kind of get her started in the Midwest, because there hasn't been, it's mostly been East Coast, West Coast, and she's a very dear person and very gifted. It's tricky for sensitive people to do these kinds of seminars. We call it a retreat, but I don't know. It could be quite a few people come. We're a little worried about that. I think we're thinking about, if too many people come, that the morning talk will be for as many people as come, but then that will limit, they'll have to leave. And so, because we want to keep it a smallish group to have the retreat part. So if anybody really wants to come, they should probably sign up soon, because I don't know. I haven't talked to her in a few days, but she was getting worried about how can we call this a retreat?
Oh, don't worry about that, because it's a retreat from the world, and anytime you have highly sensitives together, all of a sudden
absolutely.
They'll be
crazy.
Confirmed and think, oh my gosh, it's not just me.
The
I thought
best
it was just
thing
me.
is being in a group of people, of just highly sensitive people, because it's like being in church. It's so quiet and it's so deep, and it really changes your understanding of yourself a great deal. So I always urge even the most introverted, sensitive people to go to one gathering or retreat. Jacqueline Strickland, who's connected to my website, does HSP gatherings about twice a year, and we even do them in Europe, and I either attend or do those by telephone, but they're worth doing at least once just because of the value of meeting other sensitive people, and you just kind of, oh my goodness, I had no idea, you're just like me, so...
Right. Well, and, I want to mention, listeners, that there is an article on Kripalu Yoga, More Than Just a Stretch, in this issue of Spirit Seeker, and it doesn't surprise me that that's one of the venues that you would choose to bring your knowledge to. Yes,
yeah,
because
it's a great place.
Yeah, and what they say, just a little excerpt from this article, says, the confidence gained through Kripalu Yoga overflows into your life, encouraging you to embrace every experience. Mm-hmm. And to let life flow without resistance. And the intimate and nurturing relationship you establish with your own body makes every sensation sacred, which is what you're talking about with HSPs and sexuality and sensitivity and spirituality and, and how in love, like, you and your husband have made it work because you honor each other's differences. And,
absolutely, yes.
And so often, people... as I was describing in my first marriage, you're too sensitive, and I then became this stoic kind of person and didn't cry for a long time. And then, I remember, well, because, I was, and it just was easier to become rather than go through what I would have to.
Yes, we can adapt like chameleons, but by nature we cry easily.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, the empathy and the empathic skills and all of that have to go underground in some situations. I like, as a clinical psychologist, it's sad to see that happen, but I like to see sensitive people flower. Often the only place where they see their creativity is in their dreams. When I was first learning to be a clinical psychologist, I worked with dreams, and I'd go to my consultant, and I'd say, oh, here's a dream this person had. The person who was not highly sensitive would say, nobody could have a dream like that. They made that up. And I said, oh, no, this is common with sensitive people.
Oh, yeah. And you studied with Carl Jung, so
oh, yes.
Yes. The symbolism and everything else.
Yes.
And, it's just, at the children, we talked about, well, we haven't talked about this in this conversation, but I don't know if you've heard, we went from, the different color auras, blues, greens, purples, and then New Age purple, and then we went into the indigos, and then the indigos were when you started seeing these highly sensitives more with children, and then there were 6 different kinds of indigos. Well, now we're into what they call the crystal children, who are the psychic children, and and I think that it's not that they're more psychic; they're just more sensitive, which is exactly what you are addressing. And I just think you just do a brilliant job.
Thank
you. And I have not read your book.
So
I would like to read your book, but just preparing, with everything I could find online. I just thought, oh, you understand. So I want to mention again, we're almost at the end of our time for the interview. This is why I love Blog Talk Radio. I was in a traditional studio for many years, and what I can tell you is Blog Talk is the way of present time for radio interviews, because the minute this show is finished, it will be archived. You just have to go to Spirit Seeker, click on the radio icon. It takes you directly to all the different interviews, and we have just had the interviews by date, but my producer is now going to put Dr. Elaine Aron, HSP, so you'll be able to see and click directly on this. You can send your friends to that link, and it's just nice because we have so many people know that if they miss the show live, they can listen to it later. And it's just helping us reach out to so many more people. And I do want to mention that you can help us with the show in a couple of ways. Number one, there's a favorite the show button somewhere on Blog Talk. And what that does is the more Blog Talk knows that, hey, people are listening to Cynde Meyer's Spirit Seeker radio show every week, what it does is it brings us up to the front of the page. There's I forget how many interviewers on this particular platform, and we're underneath the category of spirituality. And so it just helps us reach more people. And I cannot tell you how many people come up to me at different events, and they're like, this is my spiritual food and my nourishment. I've learned so much. I listened to your interview, blah, blah, by so-and-so. Excuse me. And you can do it from your iPod. we just encourage you to let other people know about the interview. If you send us an email to info@spiritseeker.com, we send out a weekly reminder about the radio show. We also send out a link whenever the new magazine's online, and because we have learned that the 20 and 30-year-olds do not read print magazines anymore. That's why we have Nooks and we have Kindles, etc. They know that it destroys the environment with the trees. So the 20 and 30-year-olds read everything online. And I'll walk into a place before the print magazine sometimes is even in the communities. There it is, it's online, and people say, I already read that article. And we also get stat reports, and we know that you're listening, and we know you're listening, a lot of times after the hours. They don't tell me what hour you're listening, like the Google Docs thing with the teachers, being able to see each of their kids' computers. But we know that you're listening. We just really want to thank you for listening, and I want to thank Dr. Aron for being part of the show. I really look forward to this interview, so I just really want to thank you so much for the work you're doing. I want to thank Candy Crawford for bringing you to Wheaton, Illinois, which is, for those of you, it's in the greater Chicago area. It's not far at all, and it is an all-day workshop on Saturday, September 29th, which is next Saturday, from 9 to 5, and once again, you can call Candy Crawford at 630-991-6200. And she has information at her website. There's a direct link to register at candycrawfordlcsw.com/retreat. You can go to Dr. Elaine Aron's website to order any of the books or the workbook and find out how to do the self-test, etc. And that is www.hsperson.com. I also want to mention that Spirit Seeker will be at the Harmony Festival. I will not be there, but the magazines will be there at the Harmony Festival next weekend. We are expanding into Arkansas, as I mentioned. We will be at a number of different events happening throughout the whole Midwest. And I just really want to thank our listeners, thank our readers, and Dr. Aron, thank you so much.
Thank you, Cynde. Thank you. It was a wonderful interview. Thanks a lot.
You.
Bye-bye.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.